Welcome to the Boring Historian. You awaken not in the comfort of your own bed, but in the narrow, dimly lit quarters of an Edwardian household. Far below the elegant rooms that gleam with chandeliers and polished mahogany, the ceiling above you feels low, the air faintly damp, and the mattress beneath your back is lumpy, filled not with soft feathers but with straw. It's flattened from countless nights of restless sleep. Your blanket is thin and scratchy wool. It's barely enough to keep out the chill that seeps through the stone foundations of the great house. It is not yet dawn, and the world outside still slumbers. But down here, below stairs, the day has already begun. There are no gentle alarms, no kindly wake-up calls, only the knowledge, drilled into every servant, that lateness is unforgivable. The mistress of the house does not care how tired you are, nor does the butler above you in rank. If you are not up before the bells, you are already failing.
You hear faint stirring in the corridor beyond your door.
The soft rustle of aprons being tied, the quiet thud of boots sliding onto feet, the strike of a match as someone lights a candle. Other servants are rising housemaids, scullery maids, footmen all, shuffling into wakefulness with the dull obedience of those who have no choice. You push back the blanket and swing your feet onto the cold flagstone floor. The shock runs up your legs, waking you faster than any bell could. The small room is still cloaked in shadow, save for the faint orange flicker of candlelight from the corridor. Your breath clouds faintly in the air. It is that cold here, even indoors. The servants' corridor is narrow, its plastered walls stained with years of smoke and coal dust. As you step out, you see others moving briskly, already tugging on aprons, already bustling toward the kitchen. No one speaks. Words waste time, and time is a luxury none of you possess. Somewhere further down the hall, a door opens with a soft groan. The scullery maid, the lowest of the low, slips out carrying a heavy bucket. Her face is pale with exhaustion, her hands already red from the previous day's endless scrubbing. She will spend today with her arms elbow-deep in icy water, washing dishes and pans until her skin cracks.
Ice.
You feel a pang of sympathy, but there is no time to dwell. You, too, have duties to attend. The first task is simple, yet endless. Prepare the house before the family above stirs. That means lighting the fires in every bedroom and sitting room, so that when the master and mistress awaken, the rooms are warm and glowing. It means hauling coal and wood, often in silence, and kneeling before hearths to coax flames from reluctant embers. It means moving quickly, yet invisibly so, that the family never imagines how much effort goes into their comfort. You make your way toward the kitchen, where the great range is being stoked to life. The clang of iron doors opening, the scrape of coal being shoveled, the sudden roar of flames, they echo in the cavernous space, filling it with both warmth and the acrid scent of burning fuel. The kitchen is the heart of the servants' world, though not a heart of kindness. It is hot, smoky, chaotic, a place of constant work. Already, the cook is there, barking quiet orders, ensuring that breakfast preparations begin before the rest of the household even thinks of opening its eyes. But for now, your duty lies elsewhere. You take up a small scuttle of coal, heavy in your hands, and prepare to climb the narrow back staircase that winds its way up to the elegant rooms above. As you ascend, your candle sputters, casting shifting shadows on the walls. The air grows warmer as you near the upper floors, yet the weight in your arms and the ache in your shoulders remind you that comfort belongs to others, not to you. At the top of the stairs, the contrast is stark. The grand hallway spreads before you, lined with polished wood, gleaming brass fixtures, rich carpets muffling every step. Yet even here, in this world of luxury, your presence must remain unseen. A servant is a shadow, a whisper. You kneel before the first fireplace, strike a match, and begin building the day's illusion of effortless warmth. The flames catch slowly, licking at the kindling, then growing bolder as the coal glows red. You do not pause to admire your work. There are a dozen more fires to light before the sun rises. A dozen more chances to fail, to draw the attention of those who expect perfection, but never gratitude. As you rise, brushing soot from your hands onto an already stained apron, you know this is only the beginning. Your day stretches long ahead, a cycle of silent labor that will not end until well past midnight. Above stairs, the family dreams in comfort. Below stairs, your reality has begun. And so the first breath of the day is not one of rest, but of duty. You feel it settle over you like a heavy cloak. This is life as an Edwardian servant, invisible, exhausting, unrelenting. And it is only the first hour of the day. The weight of the coal scuttle digs into your arm as you carry it along the narrow servant's passage. The handle bites against your palm, and with each step you can hear the rattle of small black chunks shifting inside. It is heavy, but it must be carried without spilling, without delay, and without complaint. The hour is still early. Outside, the world is wrapped in darkness, though a faint gray haze suggests that morning is approaching. In the grand rooms above, the family sleeps undisturbed, their dreams softened by down pillows and thick feather mattresses. They do not hear the creak of the servant stairs or the dull scrape of coal being dragged along in iron buckets. They will never see the work that prepares their world. That is the point. Duh. A servant's duty is to be invisible, to make the household run as if by magic while the reality is endless labor carried out in freezing silence. Your first stop is the drawing room. You push open the tall wooden door as quietly as possible, knowing that a careless sound might echo through the house. Inside, the air is sharp with cold. The fire grate yawns black and empty, stark contrast to the room's elegance, the velvet drapes pulled heavy across the windows. The polished piano standing silently in the corner, the plush carpet that cushions your tired feet. You kneel before the hearth and begin your work. First, you clean away the ashes left from the previous evening, scraping them into a small iron pan and carrying them back to the scuttle. The ashes are soft and light, and as you empty them, a faint gray cloud rises and coats your fingers, clinging to your skin no matter how often you wipe it away. There is no glamour in this task, no grace, only dust, soot, and the lingering smell of smoke. Next, you build the fire anew, small pieces of kindling first, stacked neatly in the grate. Then larger logs positioned carefully so the air can flow between them. Finally, a scattering of coal, dull and black now, but destined to glow red once the fire takes hold. You strike a match, shielding the flame with your hand, and touch it to the wood. At first, nothing. Then a crackle, a faint curl of smoke, and the fragile beginning of warmth. It takes time and patience to coax the flames into life. Too much coal too soon, and the fire will choke. Too little, and it will sputter out before the room is warm. You crouch there, watching, waiting, feeding the fire gently until it catches. Only when the coals begin to glow and the flames burn steadily do you allow yourself to rise. You brush the soot from your apron, gather your scuttle, and move on. There are still more fireplaces, waiting bedrooms, sitting rooms, the library, and the morning room. Each one must be lit before the family rises, so that when they awake, they find themselves in comfort, never knowing the chill that once filled these spaces. Back and forth you go, hauling, kneeling, scraping, lighting. Each room presents the same ritual. Empty ashes, build kindling, strike a match, tend the flame. In some rooms, the chill is so deep it seeps into your bones as you work, numbing your hands and stinging your nose with cold. In others, you catch a whiff of last night's tobacco smoke, or the faint sweet perfume lingering in the air from a lady's evening dress, discarded carelessly by her maid. Yet no matter how grand the surroundings, the carved mantelpieces, the ornate gilt frames, the silken draperies, your place in them remains the same. Kneeling on the floor, your apron stained with soot, your presence temporary and unnoticed. By the time the final fire is lit, your arms ache from lifting coal, your knees throb from crouching on hard floors, and your clothes bear the marks of smoke and ash. But there is no pause for rest, no moment to admire the quiet glow of flames now flickering in every grate. The fires are merely the first step in a day that has only just begun. You glance at the tall clock in the hallway as you pass. It is not yet 6. In another hour, the master and mistress will rise to a house that feels warm and welcoming. They will never imagine how many steps, how many buckets of coal, and how many kneeling hands went into creating the illusion of effortless comfort. Your candle flickers as you descend once more to the servants' quarters, leaving behind the warmth of the fires you lit. For the family, the day is only about to begin. For you, it already feels as though you have lived a lifetime of labor, and yet the hardest tasks are still waiting. The warmth of the fires you have kindled lingers faintly on your skin, but the moment you return below stairs, it vanishes into the chill. There is no time to dwell on the ache in your arms from hauling coal. New duties wait, duties that require even more patience, silence, and unbroken effort. Before the family stirs, the house must gleam. Every hearth you have just lit must not only burn brightly, but also appear immaculate. Ashes must vanish, soot must be swept away, brass grates must shine, as though they had never known the touch of smoke. The illusion of perfection is relentless, and it falls on you and the other servants to maintain it. Armed with a rag, a stiff brush, and polished with a scent both sharp and sour, you return to the drawing room hearth. Though the fire burns steadily now, its surrounding metal is dull with last night's residue. You crouch again, rubbing until the brass brightens, working the polish into every curve and edge until it reflects faintly in the low light. Your hands already feel rough, the rag blackened, but there is no space for half measures. Once finished, you rise and cross the room to the pair of boots left by the hearth. They belong to the master of the house, polished to perfection each morning, dulled again each evening by wear. You sit on the low stool and begin the ritual of brushing. First, the stiff bristles sweep away the faint traces of dirt clinging to the leather. Then comes the polish, applied in careful circular motions, until the boots gleam faintly even in the candlelight. The smell of the wax clings to your hands, sharp and oily, but it is a scent you will know as well as coal and soap before the day is through. Boots are only one part of the endless cycle of polishing. The family's silver must be bright, the banisters smooth beneath their fingers, the mirrors spotless, and the doorknobs glowing as if newly forged. You move quietly through the rooms, rag in hand, polishing as you go. The silence of the house is broken only by the faint hiss of the fire and the soft rasp of cloth against metal. Next comes the floors. In the servants' world, there are no machines to ease the task. A heavy bucket of soapy water is carried up from the scullery, sloshing with each careful step. You kneel, dip a stiff brush into the suds, and scrub the wooden boards until the water turns gray. The work is back-breaking, your arms moving rhythmically, the bristles scratching into the wood as the smell of soap fills the air. And it is not only the floorboards. Carpets, thick and costly, must be beaten outside, though in these earliest hours, you may only smooth them, tugging them straight so they appear untouched by footsteps. Runners along the hall must be aligned perfectly, so that when the master descends, nothing looks out of place. Dust must be swept from corners, even though it gathers again by evening. The strangest part of the work is how much must be done unseen. When the family rises, everything must already be in order. They will never hear the scrape of brushes, never see the smudges of soot on your apron, never think about the aching arms that made their room shine. The very fact that you are invisible is proof that you are succeeding. At the time you have finished one room, another demands your attention. The repetition dulls your mind, almost soothing in its monotony. Scrub, polish, straighten, dust. You work by instinct more than thought, your body moving through the motions as your mind drifts. Yet even this quiet rhythm carries its own pressure. Perfection is expected, not praised. One overlooked speck of soot, one streak left on a mirror, and the housekeeper will scold you sharply. At last you step back and look across the drawing room. The fire burns brightly in its shining grate, the boots gleam, the floors reflect faintly in the soft light. The room is ready as though no hand ever touched it. Yet it was your hands, cracked and raw, that shaped the illusion. You leave the room in silence, closing the door softly behind you. Another hallway stretches ahead, another set of hearths, floors, and boots awaiting your labor. The bells upstairs remain silent. But the house is stirring faintly, now the sense that time is pressing forward, that the family's waking moment draws near. And so you bend again to the task, brush in hand, rag ready, polishing and scrubbing in the dim glow of dawn. It is a ritual of invisibility, one you will repeat not once, but dozens of times before the day is through. For you, the morning has already lasted hours. For them, it has not even begun. The house is silent still, but beneath the silence lies a constant tension, a waiting, a listening. It is the tension every Edwardian servant knows, the expectation of the bells. You descend again into the servants' corridor, your boots echoing softly against the stone floor. Along one wall hangs a curious device, both ordinary and menacing, the bellboard. A row of neat brass bells, each labeled in fine lettering. Morning room, drawing room, master's chamber, mistress's chamber, dining room, nursery. Every important room in the house has its bell, each connected by a thin wire hidden in the walls. When the master, or mistress, or even a guest, pulls a cord upstairs, the bell on this board trembles. It rings with a sharp metallic chime, and the little brass tag beneath it quivers, marking the room that demands attention. For the servants below stairs, it is not a polite request. It is an order, instantaneous and unquestionable. You glance at the row of bells now. They hang still, silent in the half-light of morning. But already your body is attuned to them, ears strained for the first metallic jingle. You know from stories told by older servants that one must never keep a bell waiting. Even a moment's delay can earn you a rebuke from the housekeeper, a scowl from the butler, or worse, a sharp word from the master or mistress themselves. The bells strip away any sense of your own time. You may be scrubbing a floor, polishing a shoe, or eating a meager crust of bread in the servants' hall, but when a bell rings, you must drop everything. You wipe your hands, straighten your apron, and run. The order is silent, but absolute. One of the younger maids once said it best, "The bells own us." And as you stand there now, staring at their polished curve, you cannot help but feel the truth of her words. It is the butler who oversees the bellboard. His ear is trained to distinguish each note, and he dispatches servants with a flick of his hand, wordless and efficient. The housekeeper too watches, assigning her maids to chambers with a glance that brooks no refusal. Every servant knows their place in the hierarchy, and every servant knows that hesitation can mark them as unreliable. At last, the silence breaks. A sharp, bright jingle cuts through the air. One bell trembles against the board, its brass tag quivering. Mistress's chamber. The sound is not loud, but in the servants' hall, it echoes like a commandment. Immediately, a maid hurries forward. She smooths her apron, takes a steadying breath, and slips upstairs with her cleaning cloths and brushes. Her task will be to prepare the mistress's room, drawing back curtains, shaking out rugs, laying out a morning gown. All before the lady of the house opens her eyes fully to the day. The mistress will expect warmth, brightness, and fresh air, without the faintest trace of the hard work that created it. Moments later, another bell jingles, this time master's chamber. The butler himself steps forward, his expression calm, but his pace brisk. He signals to a footman, who sets off at once. His duty will be to open shutters, prepare shaving water, and stand ready for any instruction. If the master demands tea, it must arrive without delay. If he requires his papers, they must appear as though conjured from the air. One by one, the bells begin to stir. The nursery chimes faintly. A soft sound, but one that sends the nursemaid scurrying. For children must be dressed, fed, and kept quiet before they disturb their parents. The morning room bell rings next, summoning another maid to prepare for breakfast service. To the family above, each tug of a cord is a small gesture, a convenience taken for granted. To the servants below, each ring is a command that divides their lives into fragments, pulling them from one task to the next with no rhythm, but that dictated by others. You feel it keenly now. There is no such thing as finishing one duty before beginning another. A fire half tended, a boot half polished, a rag dropped mid-scrub, if the bell rings, all must be abandoned. The bells weave themselves into the very rhythm of your day. It's unpredictable yet inescapable until you begin to anticipate them even before they sound. And though the bells command obedience, they also enforce silence. You must never question, never complain, never betray fatigue. Orders are to be carried out quietly, invisibly, as though no order was given at all. The family does not wish to see effort. They wish only to see results. By the time the bells fall quiet again, the servants' corridor is in motion, maids scurrying upstairs. Footmen polishing quickly before running to answer, the butler standing watch like a general over his troops. You glance once more at the row of brass and wires, their gleam reflecting faintly in the gaslight. They are not loud, they are not cruel in themselves, yet they rule you more absolutely than any lock or chain. The bells dictate your every step, and in their metallic ringing lies the truth of a servant's life: to exist at the whim of another. Summoned in silence, dismissed without thanks, and as you wipe the soot from your hands and brace yourself for the next chime, you realize this is still only the morning. The day stretches long ahead, and the bells will not fall silent until long after darkness returns. The bells have rung, the bedrooms have been warmed, the curtains drawn, and the carpets straightened. Above stairs, the family is only now beginning to stir, while below, the servants are already deep into the day. In the great kitchen, the cook reigns supreme. Her orders are sharp, her eyes quick, and her temper legendary. Around her bustle, the younger maids and the scullery girl, darting like shadows between tables and stoves. The kitchen smells already of roasting meats, baked bread, and the faint, rich aroma of coffee. The clang of pans, the hiss of water hitting hot metal. The steady rhythm of knives chopping fruit, this is the music of the servants' morning. Breakfast for the family must be perfect. The long mahogany dining table upstairs will soon be laid with gleaming silver cutlery and fine porcelain dishes, each piece polished until it reflects the gaslight. The linen cloth must be crisp and spotless, its edges falling just so. On sideboards, decanters of juice will stand ready, and platters will be prepared to hold eggs, fish, sausages, toast, butter, jams, perhaps even kedri, a rich dish of rice and smoked fish, popular among the fashionable. The butler oversees it all, his expression severe but calm. He inspects the silver, straightens the cutlery, ensures the glasses gleam. For him, this is ritual, a performance in which there is no room for error. A knife laid a fraction out of line, a dish arriving lukewarm, even a crumb visible on the cloth could bring a quiet but scathing reprimand. For you, the task may be to carry trays laden with steaming dishes, to run from kitchen to dining room, balancing the weight carefully so as not to spill. You move quickly, but your footsteps must remain silent on the thick carpets. To the family, food seems to arrive effortlessly, set before them with a nod of the butler's head. They will never imagine the sweat and coordination that carried it from stove to table. At last the family gathers. The master descends, his shoes polished bright, his papers tucked beneath one arm. The mistress enters gracefully, her gown arranged by her maid, her expression composed. They take their seats, scarcely glancing at the servants who stand at attention along the walls. Soon the children may join them, chattering with the careless ease of youth, unaware of the dozens of hands that have prepared their meal. The family dines on delicacies. They sip their coffee or tea from fragile cups, bite into soft bread spread with creamy butter, and select from an array of dishes laid out before them. Their conversation is quiet, their movements leisurely. Not why, and you, standing nearby, are not to eat, not to taste, not even to allow your gaze to linger too long on the food you have carried. Servants eat at different times, in different rooms. To dine with the family would be unthinkable, a breach of the invisible wall that separates above and below. When the family has had their fill, the plates are cleared quickly, the dishes carried back down the servants' stairs. Only when the platters return, often with scraps left behind, do you and the others find your own breakfast. Crusts of bread, cooled porridge, perhaps a slice of bacon if fortune smiles. It is eaten quickly, at the servants' table in the kitchen, in the brief lull before the next task calls. There is no leisure, no lingering conversation, only the swift filling of stomachs before work resumes. The contrast is stark. Above stairs, polished silver, steaming coffee, delicate china. Below stairs, chipped plates, hurried bites, the constant watch of the clock. It is not starvation you are fed, after all, but it is a reminder, each morning, of the gulf between those you serve and yourself. When the meal is done, your day does not ease. The dishes must be scrubbed, the table reset for luncheon, the rooms aired, the laundry sorted, the carpets beaten. Already the bells threaten to ring again, their invisible summons pulling you from one duty to the next. You glance once more at the scraps on your plate before rising to return to work. There is no room for complaint, no space for longing. The family's breakfast has been served, your own has been swallowed in haste, and the day stretches long ahead. Above stairs, the family sits content, sipping their tea. Below stairs, you rise from the table with sore feet, chapped hands, the quiet knowledge that your labor is only beginning. This is breakfast for the Edwardian household. Abundance above, austerity below. And for you, the servant, it is not a moment of comfort. It is a reminder of your place. Life as an Edwardian servant was not only about hard labor, but also about knowing your exact place in a rigid and unforgiving hierarchy. Below stairs, the world mirrored the social order of the family above, only in miniature and often harsher. At the very top of this hidden society stood the butler and the housekeeper. The butler was the master of all male servants, the guardian of the wine cellar, the keeper of the keys, and the silent overseer of the family's reputation. His polished shoes, impeccable suit, and steady voice marked him as a figure both respected and feared. Beside him was the housekeeper, often stern, sometimes motherly, always watchful. She controlled the female staff with quiet authority, deciding who would scrub floors and who would be trusted with delicate linens. Beneath them, the hierarchy was carved sharply. Footmen, with their tall frames and neat livery, carried trays and opened doors with rehearsed precision. Maids, divided into ranks of kitchen maids, scullery maids, and ladies' maids, followed orders without question. Even among those who cleaned, subtle rivalries brewed. A kitchen maid might resent a lady-s maid for being closer to the family, while a scullery maid longed to rise above endless dishwashing into more respectable tasks. Punishments for stepping out of place were rarely shouted. They came instead in quiet humiliation or the worst of jobs assigned. A servant who dared to talk back might find herself scrubbing the outdoor privy in the dead of winter. A careless mistake could mean being frozen out by the others. Silent reminders that you had failed to know your place. This strict order kept the household running smoothly. It had also trapped each servant in a role from which escape was nearly impossible. In such a system, you learned quickly that survival meant deference. You bowed your head when spoken to by a superior, answered with yes, Mr., or yes, Mrs., and never, ever forgot the invisible ladder that defined your worth. In truth, the hierarchy downstairs was as rigid as the class system upstairs, only here. You were both worker and prisoner, bound by obedience and fear of disgrace. Once the fires were lit, hearths cleaned, and the first traces of the morning's bustle hidden, the housemaids began their ceaseless round. Their tasks were endless, repetitive, and often invisible, because the highest compliment for a housemaid was that no one noticed her work at all. By the time the family stirred from their feather beds, the maids had already been at it for hours. Dusting was the first order of business. Edwardian homes, with their ornate furniture, heavy draperies, and endless bric-a-brac, seemed designed to trap dust. With rags, brushes, and beeswax polish, the maids glided silently through drawing rooms and libraries, wiping away every speck before it could be seen. From there, they moved to the carpets, hauling them outside when possible, beating the thick fibers until clouds of dust billowed into the morning air. Their arms ached, their backs strained, yet the carpets had to look as though no one had ever set foot upon them. Making beds was an art in itself. Sheets were folded with military precision, blankets tucked so tightly they looked untouched. Any crease or lump was unacceptable, especially if the mistress of the house came to inspect. Pillows had to be plumped, counterpanes smoothed, chamber pots discreetly emptied and washed. The work was hurried, for there were dozens of rooms to attend to before breakfast ended and the family began their day. Inspection was the shadow that loomed over every task. A finger swiped along a mantelpiece, a glance into a corner behind the curtains, or a disapproving shake of the housekeeper's head could undo hours of effort. For the housemaid's, failure meant shame, extra duties, and sometimes dismissal. Success meant simply surviving another day unnoticed, their labor vanishing into the polished surfaces of the household. What made the work most exhausting was its endlessness. Dust always returned, carpets were always trodden, and beds always unmade by nightfall. The housemaids lived in a cycle of perpetual tidying, chasing an impossible ideal of order that was never meant to end. At the very bottom of the household hierarchy was the scullery maid, the youngest and most overworked servant of all. Her world was the kitchen's back corner, a damp and smoky place where warmth from the stoves rarely reached. If other servants complained of fatigue, the scullery maid endured exhaustion of a different kind. monotonous, backbreaking, and endless drudgery that no one else wished to do. Her day began before anyone else's, for she had to wash the pots and pans left over from the servant's own late-night supper. The sink, little more than a stone basin, was filled with cold water from a hand pump, sometimes with a few scraps of soap flakes added if they were available. There were no rubber gloves, no modern comforts. She plunged her bare hands into the icy water, scrubbing until her skin cracked and turned raw. In winter, her fingers bled from the cold. In summer, they burned from constant dampness. The dishes never stopped. After the servants' breakfast came the family's, and with it delicate china, silver cutlery, and fragile glassware that had to be washed with exquisite care. One careless slip could mean a ruined set of porcelain or an heirloom plate smashed on the flagstone floor. The punishment for such a mistake was swift and unforgiving. Beyond dishes, she scoured great iron pots blackened from hours over coal fires, hauling them to the yard to be scrubbed with sand and boiling water until her arms shook from strain. Grease clung to every surface. Soot crept into her lungs, and the smell of half-rotted scraps never quite left her clothes. When not scrubbing, she polished copper pans until they gleamed like mirrors, often working by lamplight, long after the rest of the house had gone quiet. The scullery maid's place was one of isolation. She was too junior to join the other servants in the warm kitchen, too lowly for anyone to notice unless she failed. For her, the Edwardian household was not a place of grandeur, but a world of cold stone floors, endless piles of dishes, and aching hands that never healed. Among the male servants of an Edwardian household, the footman was both visible and invisible at once. He was always present, yet never acknowledged, a silent figure who stood ready to anticipate the needs of the family without ever intruding upon their world. His polished livery, with shining brass buttons and a powdered wig in more traditional households, was not just clothing but a symbol of the family's prestige. A tall, handsome footman was considered an ornament to the household, chosen as much for appearance as for ability. The day for a footman was filled with stillness and waiting. He stood for hours in the dining room during meals, hands clasped lightly behind his back, ready to move at the faintest nod or flick of the butler's eye. He fetched dishes from the kitchen, carried trays laden with porcelain and crystal, and placed them before the family with precise, practiced movements. Not a sound could be made, no clinking of cutlery, no shuffle of boots on the polished floors. Silence was part of the role, and so was invisibility. Yet his duties extended beyond meal times. He answered the front door, carried coal and logs upstairs, polished silver until it reflected like glass, and ran errands into town. He fetched luggage for departing guests, held open carriages, and even escorted ladies in the household on walks when propriety demanded a male presence. To the family, he was never a man with thoughts or fatigue merely the footman. But behind the quiet facade was a body stiff from standing for hours, a back sore from carrying heavy trays, and a spirit bent to the will of a household that demanded grace without recognition. For many footmen, the dream was to rise one day to the rank of butler. But for most, life passed in silent service, marked only by the gleam of their livery and the polished surfaces of the household they maintained. For the Edwardian servant, time was not their own. Every tick of the clock, every clang of a bell, every whistle of the master's carriage arriving at the front steps dictated their existence. Unlike the family upstairs, who could dawdle over letters or stroll in the garden at leisure, servants lived in a world where minutes carried the weight of discipline and survival. The house itself seemed to pulse with time. The bellboard in the servants' hall hung like an oracle of duty, each sudden jangle announcing a command. A drawing-room bell meant tea must be brought at once. The nursery bell demanded attention to the children. The master's bell required a valet to appear within moments. Delay was inexcusable. Hesitation was noticed. Even the faintest lapse could bring a scolding from the butler, or worse, dismissal. Beyond the bells, there was the relentless daily schedule. Fires had to be lit before the family stirred. Boots cleaned before the master stepped outside. Meals prepared and served on the stroke of the hour. The timing of every task was measured against the needs of those above. The morning's dusting and bed-making had to be complete before inspection. Afternoon tea had to arrive precisely when expected, not a minute late and never early. Even polishing silver became a race against time, done under the pressure of knowing dinner was being laid upstairs. For the servant, there was no luxury of losing track of hours. They lived in constant awareness of deadlines, a quiet drumbeat of duty that filled the corridors below stairs. When they did snatch a moment of rest sitting briefly on a hard wooden bench in the servant's hall, it was never truly restful, for the sound of a bell might ring at any moment, shattering even that small reprieve. In an Edwardian household, time belonged to the masters. For the servants, life was an endless battle to keep pace with the clock. Their own needs always postponed, their own hours always sacrificed. When the clock struck the hour and the day upstairs truly began, the atmosphere below stairs shifted. Servants who had been scurrying since before dawn now prepared themselves for the moment that defined much of their labor, the first appearance of the master and mistress of the house. It was not a dramatic entrance, nor did it need to be. The sound of footsteps on the grand staircase, the swish of heavy fabrics, or the soft opening of a door was enough to command attention. Servants did not stare openly. To do so was considered forward and disrespectful. Instead, they lowered their eyes, retreated to the walls, or moved silently out of sight. In many households, it was expected that the master or mistress should pass through their own halls without ever truly noticing those who kept them running. This vanishing act was part of the strange paradox of domestic service. Servants were essential to every detail of the family's comfort, yet they were expected to be invisible, presence felt only through what had already been prepared. The fire already burning in the grate, the polished boots by the door, the gleaming silver set out for breakfast. The air faintly scented with fresh coal smoke and beeswax polish. All the signs of labor were there, but the laborers themselves were not meant to intrude. Still, invisibility was not the same as absence. The butler, for example, stood quietly in his dark coat, hands clasped behind his back, always within reach, but never imposing. A lady's maid might hover discreetly near a door, ready to assist if her mistress's gown required adjustment. Footmen stood at the edges of rooms, erect and silent, their polished livery reflecting the household's wealth more than their own identities. The mistress might comment on the floral arrangement in the drawing room, perhaps praising it or criticizing it, never considering the maid who had risen in the gray hours of morning to fetch and cut the blooms. The master might remark on the perfect shine of his shoes, forgetting that a boy had bent over them with aching hands and polished paste long before the sun had risen. For the servants, this invisibility was both protection and burden. To be unnoticed was often safer than to be noticed for a mistake. Yet it also meant erasure. Life lived in the shadows of grandeur, where your work defined the beauty of a household, but your person was expected to fade like wallpaper. Thus, when the master and mistress appeared, the house became a stage. Every servant knew their part, their silence, their stillness, their careful withdrawal into the background was as important as the tasks they had performed since dawn. It was the art of service, to be indispensable and yet unseen. By the time the bells announced that luncheon was to be served, the household machinery had already been turning for hours. In the kitchen, pots had bubbled steadily since morning, the cook orchestrating her team with clipped instructions, while the scullery maid scrubbed and scoured with hands raw from lye soap and icy water. The air was thick with steam, the smell of roasted meats, simmering stocks, and fresh bread mingling with the sharper tang of polish and coal smoke that drifted up from the ranges. When the hour arrived, the transition from preparation to performance was absolute. The butler, that solemn guardian of order, inspected every detail before the dishes ever left the kitchen. Was the silver spotless? Did the table gleam under the white linen cloth? Were the chairs correctly spaced, the cutlery aligned, the glassware shining with no hint of a smudge? Nothing was too small to escape his eye. For the dining table was not merely a place for nourishment, it was a stage where wealth and respectability were displayed with quiet precision. The footmen, dressed in livery polished to perfection, moved into position like actors taking their cues. They carried trays with gloved hands, stepping lightly so as not to disturb the polished parquet floors or clink a dish too loudly. Conversation was forbidden. Their presence was an unspoken language of attentiveness. A guest might glance toward a footman and, without a word, have their glass refilled or a plate replaced. Servants were expected to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to hover in silence, invisible yet always ready. The master and mistress of the house sat at the head of the table, perhaps joined by family members or invited guests. Their talk flowed smoothly about politics, society, the affairs of neighbors, while the servants listened without listening. To overhear was unavoidable. Acknowledge what was overheard was unthinkable. A footman might be standing only feet away, yet he was as much a piece of furniture as the carved sideboard behind him. This silence was not natural, but disciplined. A single cough, a dropped spoon, or the scrape of a shoe could ripple across the room and draw sharp eyes. A servant who intruded upon the delicate stillness risked more than embarrassment. They risked censure, or worse, dismissal. It was a silence heavy with tension, but also strangely comforting in its routine. Everyone knew their role, and the performance unfolded with clockwork regularity. For the servants, luncheon was a reminder of their dual existence. They were close enough to smell the roasted beef, the buttered potatoes, the freshly baked bread, yet they could not taste so much as a crumb until their own meager meal later in the servants' hall. They stood mere steps from wealth and refinement, yet remained forever apart, their hunger stilled only by discipline and duty. When the last plates were cleared and the family rose from the table, the silence dissolved. Only then did the servants exhale, retreating swiftly with trays and platters, returning to the steaming chaos of the kitchen. Another performance had ended, and already preparations for the next began. For in a great house, the rhythm of meals never stopped in silence, just as much as service was part of the feast. If there was one task in the household that seemed truly endless, it was the care of laundry and linens. Unlike the glamour of the dining room or the silent choreography of the drawing room, the work of the laundry was hidden, tucked away in steaming outbuildings or basements. It was invisible to the family upstairs, but without it, the smooth functioning of the household would collapse within days. Every morning, piles of garments, tablecloths, napkins, towels, sheets, and underclothes accumulated like a mountain. Nothing escaped the demand for cleanliness. The family expected fresh linens daily, clothes pressed without crease, delicate fabrics handled with cariette. The methods available were stubbornly primitive. There were no machines to do the work, no conveniences beyond sheer muscle and patience. The laundry maid, often one of the youngest and lowest-ranked servants, bore the brunt of this drudgery. She hauled heavy baskets down to the wash-house, where tubs of scalding water steamed the air and left walls slick with condensation. With raw hands and aching arms, she plunged garments into water thick with soap flakes, scrubbing relentlessly against a washboard until cloth fibers felt worn thin. Stronger items like sheets or tablecloths were boiled in great copper vats, stirred with long wooden paddles that filled the room with a pungent cloud of soap, starch, and steam. But washing was only the beginning. Afterward came drying, a process slowed by England's damp climate. On rare sunny days, linens might be strung out on long lines in the garden, flapping like white banners in the wind. More often, however, the weather drove drying indoors. Where lines sagged across the washhouse or cellar, the air heavy with the perpetual dampness of half-dry cloth. In winter, sheets froze stiff if left outside too long, crackling as if they were made of glass. Once drier, nearly dry, the real labor began, ironing and starching. Flat irons, heated over open fires, had to be rotated constantly. One cooled while another heated, so that the laundress could keep pace. Each press of the iron required care. Too cool and the fabric would not smooth, too hot and it could scorch, leaving a permanent mark that might cost her dearly. Starching added yet another step. Collars, cuffs, and table linens had to be stiffened into crisp perfection. A master or mistress expected napkins to fold sharply, shirts to stand proudly at the collar, and pillowcases to look as if no head had ever touched them. It was grueling, monotonous work, often done in sweltering heat with little pause. And it was work that never ended. No sooner had 1 week's laundry been finished than another pile began to grow. The cycle was relentless, repeating itself day after day, week after week, with no possibility of catching up. Servants knew the family upstairs never considered what it took to maintain the illusion of constant freshness. For the master and mistress, clean linen simply appeared, as natural as the rising sun. But for those below, The truth was different. A never-ceasing tide of cloth, water, heat, and labor. To them, laundry was not a task, but a condition of life itself, exhausting and invisible. Few rituals in the Victorian household carried as much weight as the ceremony of afternoon tea. To the family, it seemed a moment of leisure, a genteel pause in the day's rhythm when conversation flowed gently over delicate cups. But for the servants, this ritual was no small affair. It was a performance, requiring precision, etiquette, and an almost invisible choreography where the slightest mistake could bring disapproval. The preparation began well before the appointed hour. The housekeeper or butler supervised the process, ensuring that every piece of silver, china, and linen gleamed without a spot. Tea services were not merely functional, they were symbols of refinement. Porcelain cups with fragile handles, polished silver spoons, sugar tongs, and gleaming kettles were all laid out with care. The linen cloth covering the tea table had to be spotless, its folds crisp, as though ironed mere moments before. The tea itself was no simple matter of boiling water. Leaves had to be carefully measured from canisters, often kept under lock and key in the housekeeper's cupboard, due to their expense. Whether it was a strong Assam, a fragrant Darjeeling, or a smoky Lapsang, the choice of tea spoke volumes about the household's taste and standing. Water had to be brought to the boil in the kitchen, then carried swiftly upstairs, still steaming, so as not to lose heat before it touched the leaves. The steeping time was precise. Too short and the flavor was weak. Too long and it turned bitter. The responsibility for judging this fell to the butler or head footman who could ill afford a mistake. Alongside the tea, a small feast was arranged. Delicate sandwiches, their crusts neatly removed, were layered with cucumber, salmon, or egg. Scones waited in covered dishes to keep them warm, ready to be split open and spread with clotted cream and jam. Tiny cakes and biscuits, each a work of careful preparation in the kitchen, were presented on tiered stands, their appearance as important as their taste. The cook's reputation might ride on such displays, for the family's guests would silently take note of every detail. When the hour arrived, the servants moved with quiet precision. The butler, often in white gloves, brought in the tray or wheeled the trolley with a measured pace, ensuring not a spoon rattled, not a cup clinked. He poured the first cups, offering milk or sugar as requested, his hands steady and movements elegant. Footmen stood discreetly nearby, ready to replenish cups, replace plates, or discreetly whisk away crumbs. No word passed between servant and family beyond the barest necessities. It was an act of silent service designed to be unobtrusive. For the family and their guests, this was a moment of polite ease, filled with light conversation, gossip, or delicate discussion of society matters. For the servants, it was a balancing act of timing and discretion, where attentiveness was vital, yet invisibility even more so. To linger too close was intrusive. To step away too far risked neglect. When the ritual ended, the work was not yet done. Cups and saucers were gathered, the remnants of cakes and crumbs swept away, and the silver polished anew before being locked away once more. Only then could the servants exhale, readying themselves for the next demand in the unending cycle of the day. What appeared to the family as a graceful pause was for the servants, another performance in the theater of service. Dance of order, etiquette, and silence repeated day after day, always under the watchful eyes of those who never truly saw the labor behind it. The Edwardian household was more than just a home. It was a world split neatly into two realms. Above stairs in the grand drawing rooms and richly decorated chambers, life moved at a slow, almost leisurely pace. Soft carpets muffled footsteps, fires glowed in marble hearths, and trays of delicate cakes or fine wines were brought without thought to the labor behind them. Gentle laughter and quiet conversations filled the space, the family and their guests speaking as though the comforts around them were as natural as the air they breathed. For those who lived above, life was polished, elegant, and seemingly effortless. But below stairs, just a few steps down into the servants' hall or the scullery, the air was heavy with steam, the scrape of brushes, and the constant clatter of pots and pans. Here, exhaustion ruled the day. Hands were blistered from scrubbing floors and carrying coal. Backs ached from endless bending, and clothes were often damp with sweat or splashed water. The two worlds existed side by side, yet felt as though they belonged to entirely different centuries. Upstairs spoke of refinement and gentility. Downstairs was survival through labor. Servants were trained never to cross the invisible line between the two, even when delivering meals, polishing silver, or answering bells. They moved quietly, eyes lowered, fading into the background as though they were shadows rather than people. To be noticed too much was dangerous. It could invite criticism, reprimands, or even dismissal. The luxury upstairs relied entirely on the toil below, yet the family rarely acknowledged it. A perfectly laid luncheon table or a freshly aired room was admired as if it had appeared by magic rather than by hours of hidden effort. This stark divide was not just physical, it was social, emotional, and deeply ingrained in the rhythm of Edwardian life. Servants might hear laughter drifting through the floorboards or catch a glimpse of a glittering gown, but they were never a part of it. Their world was the grindstone, the endless cycle of tasks, while those above lived in a dream of leisure. And so the household carried on, one half shining in the light of ease, the other toiling in the shadows to keep that light burning. As daylight faded and the house slipped into the quiet hush of evening, another kind of work began below stairs. For the servants, the hours leading up to dinner were among the most crucial of the day. The family's grand meal was not simply about food, it was a performance of elegance, refinement, and status. And like any performance, it required invisible, tireless labor to prepare. In the dining room, the air was thick with the smell of beeswax polish. Footmen bent low over the long mahogany table, buffing its surface until it gleamed with a mirrored shine. Every chair was dusted, every carved edge of wood wiped until no trace of the day remained. Sideboards were arranged with precision, awaiting platters that would later arrive steaming from the kitchens. The silver demanded particular care. By lamplight, servants rubbed forks, spoons, and knives until they caught the glow and reflected it like small flames. The candlesticks, trays, and serving dishes were polished until they were dazzling. For even the smallest dull spot would not escape a mistress's sharp eye. The work was repetitive, rhythmic, and consuming cloths blackened with tarnish. Fingers aching, yet the shine slowly emerging, bright and flawless. Once the table was set, another layer of discipline took over. Each place had to be arranged with exacting precision, the plates perfectly centered, crystal glasses aligned, the napkins folded into precise shapes. A single fork out of line could bring reprimand, or worse, the disdain of the guests. The table itself became a quiet symbol of order, reflecting the hierarchy and control that governed the household. Downstairs, the kitchen swelled with activity. The cook directed the scullery maids and kitchen hands, ensuring roasts were basted, sauces stirred, and puddings timed to perfection. The heat of the range filled the air, mingling with the scents of meat, herbs, and sugar. Upstairs, all was calm, but here, every moment mattered. For the servants, evening preparations were a mixture of anxiety and routine, a race against time under the weight of expectation. By the time the family entered the dining room, greeted by the glow of candles and the perfection of their table, the work had already consumed hours of hidden effort. And yet, when the moment came, the servants themselves would step back into the shadows, watching silently as others enjoyed the fruits of their endless labor. If evening preparations were tense, the dinner service itself was the pinnacle of the servantess' day. The moment when all their earlier toil either held firm or risked collapse under the gaze of the family and their guests. By the time the gong echoed through the corridors, the house had transformed. Candles flickered in tall holders, polished silver gleamed, and the table appeared as though set by unseen hands. For the footmen, housemaids, and butler, this was the stage, and every movement was part of a silent, invisible choreography. The servants stood in place as the master and mistress entered, followed by guests rustling in silks and velvet. Conversation flowed easily among the diners, but not a word was spoken by the staff. Their presence was constant, but ghost-like eyes lowered, hands folded behind backs, waiting for the smallest signal. Dishes emerged from the kitchen in a carefully timed rhythm. Soups arrived first, steaming and fragrant, carried steadily up the stairs by trembling arms that dared not falter. The butler directed with the faintest nods when to serve, when to clear, when to pour wine into gleaming glasses. The footman moved silently, placing plates before each guest with precision. Ensuring the spoon lay to the right angle, the garnish unshifted, the sauce unspilled. The weight of silence pressed heavily. Servants were forbidden to intrude upon the family's conversation, yet they stood close enough to hear every word. They were witnesses to confidences, quarrels, flirtations, and boasts, all while remaining unseen, as if part of the wallpaper. To move too quickly, to breathe too loudly, or to drop even a spoon would draw reprimand, shame, or worse dismissal. The courses stretched on fish, roasts, vegetables, puddings each requiring swift clearing and careful presentation of the next. All the while, the servants' backs ached from standing upright. Their feet throbbed from endless hours, and their hands burned from carrying heavy steaming dishes. Yet they endured, faces schooled into calm composure, for endurance was the unspoken duty of service. By the time dessert arrived, delicate pastries, sugared fruits, perhaps a molded jelly glistening in candlelight, the servants were weary, but the night was far from done. Their task was not only to serve, but to remain endlessly present, ready at a moment's notice for the smallest request. A refill of wine, a napkin replaced, a dropped fork exchanged without fuss. Only when the family rose, drifting into drawing rooms for conversation and music, did the servants finally breathe again. Plates, glasses, and scraps remained, but for a brief moment, the intensity of the performance was over. They had survived another dinner service, silent yet essential, and the house once more would forget the strain behind its elegance. By the time the last echoes of laughter and clinking glasses drifted away from the dining room, the servants' work was far from finished. Midnight often came and went before they could think of resting. After the grand dinner service and the endless procession of courses, there was still the clearing away of dishes, the scrubbing of kitchens, and the silent resetting of the house for the next day. The upstairs world, by then, had long since retreated to bedrooms draped in silk and warmed by fires, but downstairs, exhaustion pressed on every face. The servants' hall, dim and smelling faintly of coal smoke and spilled gravy, became the gathering place for the staff at the very end of the day. Here, they would finally sit together, often with little more than scraps of food left over from the family's table. Cold meat carved from a joint, stale bread, or puddings already picked over by the household. These were their meals, eaten in near silence, not from etiquette, but from sheer weariness. Conversation, if it happened at all, was little more than whispers. A grumble about the butler's sharp words, the endless scrubbing the scullery maid endured, or the aching backs of the housemaids. What stood out most in these moments was not anger or rebellion, but invisibility. Each servant knew that their labor was designed to erase them from sight. Their presence was necessary, but it was also meant never to be acknowledged. To serve well was to vanish. Guests at dinner never thought of who polished their forks, who dusted their chair legs, who lit the fires that warmed their chambers. Even the master and mistress, who relied entirely on their staff, often barely glanced at their faces. To be a servant was to exist in the quiet shadows, to keep a household running while being overlooked, forgotten, even by those who depended most on you. Some found a kind of pride in this invisibility. After all, the smoother the house ran, the greater the butler or housekeeper's reputation. But for many, it was an unrelenting weight. They were always present, always working, and yet rarely seen as individuals with names, hopes, or feelings. To the family above, they were the girl, the boy, the cook, the maid. Roles, not people. As the clock crept toward 1 in the morning, servants would finally retreat to their narrow bunks, their bodies aching, hands raw, and eyes heavy. There was little time for dreams or reflection, for the morning bells would soon demand their presence once more. And yet lying there in the dark, some might have thought of lives outside these walls, what it would be like to wake with the sun instead of ours before it, to eat a meal freshly cooked for them instead of leftovers, to be looked at and spoken to as equals. But for most, exhaustion drowned even those thoughts. They slept not with comfort, but with the knowledge that they would rise again before dawn. To begin another invisible day in the service of a household that hardly noticed them at all. At last, when the final dish was scrubbed and the last rug beaten free of crumbs, the great house began to fall into silence. Upstairs, fires burned low in marble hearths, and soft lamplight glowed behind heavy curtains. But below stairs, in the cramped servant quarters, the end of the day came not with luxury, but with weariness. Gas lamps flickered faintly in the corridors, their hiss the only sound after hours of bustle. The housekeeper would ensure all doors were bolted, windows latched, and the last embers in the kitchen range dampened down. With her nod of dismissal, the staff could finally retreat. Boots heavy with fatigue shuffled down the passageways. Skirts rustled as maids moved toward their attic rooms, and the underbutler carried his lantern toward the men's quarters. Even the scullery maid, her arms red from ours and hot water, crept upstairs at last. Their rooms were plain bare boards, iron bedsteads, thin blankets. The scent of soap, polish, and damp wool lingered on their clothes and hair. They had no feather mattresses, no silk sheets. Yet to them, these narrow spaces were a kind of refuge, however modest. Here they could drop the mask of silent obedience. They might whisper a final word to a fellow maid, exchange a joke in hushed tones, or simply collapse without a sound. As the lamps were extinguished one by one, the house sank into darkness, but the silence was not peace. It was the heavy quiet of exhaustion, the brief pause in a cycle that would begin again before dawn. In a few short hours, bells would ring, fires would need kindling, boots blacking, and breakfast trays prepared. For the servants, there was no true end to the day, only a pause and interlude between the relentless demands of service. And yet in that fleeting moment, before sleep claimed them, some might allow themselves a private thought, a memory of home, a hope for something better, or a silent prayer that tomorrow might pass more gently than today. The house above slept in comfort, its family unaware of the toil beneath their feet.
Always.
But in the servant quarters, the lights were out, and with them, the lives of those who kept the household turning faded into the background, once again present, essential and yet unseen. The house rests, its grand facade quiet beneath the pale glow of the moon. Behind the polished windows, the family dreams in comfort, wrapped in heavy quilts and silken sheets. Yet it is not their hands that keep the household alive. It is the hidden labor of those below stairs, the steady rhythm of days that repeat like the ticking of the great hall clock. For the servants, time is not their own. It belongs to the house, to the bells, to the never-ending needs of those they serve. And yet, within that endless repetition lies a quiet dignity. Fire laid, each garment pressed, each plate polished, as part of a chain of tasks stretching back generations, performed by countless unseen workers. They lived lives that seldom made their way into the histories written above stairs. Yet without them, the smooth functioning of great households would have been impossible. It's the clang of pots, the whisper of brushes against stone, the shuffle of weary feet on servant staircases. These sounds formed the hidden music of Edwardian life. And though the world above rarely paused to notice, these rhythms carried on with remarkable steadiness, year after year, till social change and war would one day begin to shift the balance. But here in this moment, the house slumbers in silence. The servants, wrapped in thin blankets in their narrow beds, find what rest they can. Their dreams belong only to them. Fragments of freedom, of home, of lives imagined beyond the confines of service. As the last embers fade and night deepens, the story of their day comes gently to a close. Tomorrow it will begin again, the bells, the duties, the silent endurance. Yet for now, the house breathes in stillness, and those below stairs drift into sleep. The cycle continues, but in this pause, there is calm, fleeting peace, fragile and precious. And with that quiet thought, we leave the house in darkness, its life above and below bound together, divided, unequal, but forever intertwined.